Marrow Station hung above the storm belt of Kithra like a nail driven into a wall of moving cloud, and it had been built by people who did not expect anyone important to ever visit. That was the first thing Princess Ysenne Ithri-Vaal noticed, and she noticed it the way her people noticed everything, completely, permanently, without the mercy of forgetting. The docking cradle was welded, not grown. The seals had been patched with mismatched alloy in at least 4 different decades, each patch a slightly different color, so that the airlock ring looked like a badly healed wound. The air smelled of scorched lubricant, wet fungus, and something frying. Her escort had died 4 days ago, not the crew, the escort. The 2 picket cutters that were supposed to shadow the royal yacht through the Sarn Reach had been peeled off by an iron squall and a navigational error that was almost certainly not an error. And the yacht itself had limped into Marrow with a cracked induction spine and a drive coil singing a note that made the engineers weep. 6 weeks, the dockmaster had said. He was a grelin, 3 meters of gray muscle and patient eyes, and he had not bowed. Maybe 5 if the parts come in on the Ossuar run, maybe 8 if they don't. I am a daughter of the Vaalan ascendancy, Ysenne had said. That's nice, the grelin had said, and gone back to his manifest. So now she stood in the concourse of Marrow Station in a travel coat worth more than the station's annual power budget, with 2 surviving house guards behind her and a small, cold, methodical fury behind her eyes, and she catalogued the place because cataloging was what she was for. The Sethiri did not forget. That was not a boast, it was an anatomy. Somewhere behind her crest, in the layered coral of her memory lobe, every hour of her 26 years lay stacked and dated and retrievable, the color of her mother's sleeve on a particular morning, the exact wording of a treaty she had read at 9, the sound her tutor's stylus had made when he was disappointed. Her caste, the Ithri, were the ascendancy's memory. They were the reason the Vaalan had laws that meant anything and archives that could not be edited, and a court where a lie had a shelf life of roughly 9 seconds. To be Ithri was to believe in the bone, that a person was their record. You were what you had done, written down, witnessed, indexed. A soldier was a list of engagements. A magistrate was a list of judgments. A merchant was a list of ledgers balanced or unbalanced. When Ysenne met someone new, her first instinct, trained, honed, sanctified, was to reach for the record and read them. Which was why the young human irritated her almost immediately, and why she dismissed him inside of 11 seconds, and why that particular failure of judgment would eventually cost her every certainty she owned. She met him on the 2nd day, in the galley on deck 4 that everyone on the station simply called the kitchen. She had gone there because her yacht's own stores had been rendered inedible by the coolant rupture, and because her steward had informed her, with the trembling delicacy of a man delivering a death sentence, that her serene clarity would have to eat station food. The kitchen was a long, low room with a scarred counter, 12 stools, and a wall of hydroponic racks glowing a soft, unfashionable green. Vines had been trained along the ceiling struts. Someone had hung dried peppers from a cable run. Steam rolled off a grill in slow, fragrant sheets, and behind the grill stood a human. He was young. That was the first thing, and it stayed the first thing for a long time. Human years were short and quick, and by any measure she could apply, he was in his 20s, perhaps 26, 27, a hand's breadth into his prime. Dark hair cut short and badly, probably by himself. Brown skin, a working man's forearms, a burned scar on the inside of his left wrist where he had clearly leaned against something hot years ago and never bothered to have it corrected. His coverall was clean, faded, patched at the elbow, and his boots were old but good and cared for. He looked up when the guards came through the hatch, and he took her in, the coat, the crest, the escort, and something happened in his face that she did not have a category for. It was not awe. It was not fear. It was not the greed she was used to. It was a kind of gentle, unhurried noting, the way you might note weather. "Sit anywhere," he said. "Broth's good today, the rest is honest." "I am," she began. "Third daughter of the Vaal in ascendancy," he said. "Whole station knows. Ambu told the docks told the bar told everybody." He turned a strip of something on the grill. "Do you eat fish?" She stared at him. "Sethiri metabolize marine protein fine," he said, as though this were a matter of ordinary courtesy and not a piece of xenobiology most of the galaxy got wrong. "But you don't like the smell, so I'll do it with citrus and pepper and you won't notice. Sit down, your clarity. It'll be 10 minutes. She sat down. Later, she would spend a great deal of time examining why she had sat down. His name was Adan Reyes, and the station called him the cook, though he was not only that. She learned this over the following days by observation, because observation was a reflex she could not switch off. He was in the kitchen most mornings. He was under the deck plating on 2 in the afternoons with a coil wrench and a light strapped to his head, because Merrow's water reclamation was 40 years past its rating, and someone had to keep it breathing. He ran the hydroponic racks. He fixed the dockmaster's lift harness. He walked the outer ring at night, checking seals, tapping them with a knuckle and listening, the way a physician listens to a chest. He was, in the language of her caste, unrecorded. She had her steward run him. It was not a difficult thing to do. The ascendancy's reach was long, and even out here in the wet dark of the reach, there were relays and registries, and 100,000 civil databases that talked to one another badly but talked. Adan Reyes, human, male, born Earth Standard Year such and such in a habitat orbiting a world she had never heard of. Parents, unlisted. Education, unlisted. Employment history, 9 years of nothing, then a station worker's certification issued at Merrow 4 years ago by the dockmaster himself, which was to say, issued by a Grellan with a stamp and no interest in paperwork. No service record, no criminal record, no commendations, no debts, no marriage contracts, no property, no faith affiliation, no political registration, no convictions and no acquittals. 9 years, from 18 to 27, in which he did not appear anywhere at all. Ysenne read the file twice, which for her was an extravagance, and set it aside. "He is nobody," she said aloud in her cabin to no one. And she meant it as a fact, not an insult. That was the thing she would come to be most ashamed of. She did not sneer. She simply weighed him, found the pan empty, and stopped looking. 9 years of nothing meant 9 years of nothing. A drifter, a man who had done small work in small places and never once been important enough for anyone to write down. Her people had a word for such a life, unwritten asterisk. It was not a slur. It was a diagnosis. It meant a life that would leave no mark and had made no claim. And the correct response to an unwritten life was a kind of distant, pitying courtesy. So she was distantly, pityingly courteous to him for 11 days. She ate in his kitchen because there was nowhere else, and because the food was, infuriatingly, superb. He did not fawn. He did not ask about the court. He did not, as 3 separate merchants and 1 very persistent Kelthier freight captain had already done, try to attach himself to her orbit. He served her, and he served the welder next to her, and the servings were the same size. "You do not ask me anything," she said on the 5th day. "Didn't figure you came here to be asked things," Adan said, wiping the counter. "Everyone asks me things. They ask for patronage. They ask for a word in the ear of my father's ministers. They ask what the palace smells like." "What does it smell like?" "Cold stone and lilies, and the fear of the servants." He nodded slowly, like a man receiving directions to a place he did not intend to visit. "That's about what I'd have guessed." "You are not curious about power." "I know what it smells like," he said, and turned back to the grill. She filed the sentence, she filed everything, but she did not then read it. The old Sethiri was the first crack. He lived on the station's low ring, where the gravity was cheap and so was the rent, and his name was Das, and he had been a soldier once for somebody, and now he was 90 and his crest had gone the flat gray of dead coral. He came to the kitchen 4 nights out of 7 and ate the same bowl of grain and root, and he did not talk to anyone. Ysenne knew what he was the instant she saw him, because her memory had a shelf for that too. The scar pattern on his forearms was Threnn work, the identity brand of a labor conscript, the kind the Threnn Dominion had cut into the arms of every subject species it swallowed. A serial number, a district, an owner's sigil. The Dominion had done that to 11 worlds. It had done it to her mother's mother's people, on Ilvet, before the Ascendancy annexed them. The Threnn Dominion had ruled a third of the Reach for 240 years. It had been the largest single polity in this arm of the galaxy. It had had 400 billion subjects and a standing fleet that could sterilize a continent in an afternoon. And it had been so permanent, so architectural, so obviously eternal that the Ascendancy's own strategists had written policy papers assuming it would outlast the Ascendancy itself. And then, 12 years ago, it had come apart in 19 months. Not conquered. Nobody conquered it. It simply came apart. The ministries turned on each other. The Second Fleet refused an order and then refused to explain why. A ledger appeared in 100,000 places at once that listed by name every officer who had signed for the reduction of Ilvet, and every account that had paid them, and every ship that had carried the ash. Then the client kings started making their own arrangements. Then the Dominion's own conscripts, 11 worlds of them, walked off the job in the same week, which had never happened in 240 years, and which nobody could explain, because the 11 worlds did not share a language. Historians called it the unraveling. Ysenne had studied it. Everyone in her caste had studied it. It was the great unsolved problem of modern history, and the honest scholars admitted that the honest answer was, we do not know how it happened. She was watching old Das eat his grain and thinking about the unraveling when Adan came out from behind the counter with a second bowl, and set it down in front of the old man without being asked. And Das looked up at him, and something crossed the old soldier's ruined face. Ysenne saw it. She would always see it. It was burned into her now at the same resolution as everything else, something that was not gratitude for soup. Das put his hand flat on the counter, palm down. He held it there. It was an old gesture, and it was not a station gesture, and it took Ysenne 4 full seconds to place it, which was, for her, an eternity. It was the salute of the Ilvet freeholds, the one you gave to a witness, the one you gave to someone who had seen the thing you had seen and lived, and to whom you owed a debt you could not name in public. Adan looked at the hand for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Eat your dinner, Das." And he went back behind the counter, and the old man ate. Ysenne sat with her spoon halfway to her mouth for so long that the broth went cold. She told herself it was nothing, an old man's confusion, a gesture half remembered from a war 60 years gone, offered to a kind young man who fed him. She was very good at telling herself things. Her caste were the finest reasoners in the Ascendancy, which meant they were also the finest at reasoning their way past an inconvenient fact. 2 nights later, the bar fight happened, and after that she could not reason past anything. The bar was called Mara's, and it was 3 hatches down from the kitchen, and Ysenne went there because she was bored past the point of dignity, and because her guards had begun to suggest, with painful tact, that walking the concourse might be good for her. The trouble came in on the Ossuar run. 6 haulers, drunk, loud, and one of them mean. The mean one was a Kelthier, big even for his species, with the spiked collar plate of a man who had done gate security for somebody unpleasant, and he had decided that the small Sethiri girl who cleared tables, Mara's niece, 14 years old, had insulted him by spilling his drink. He had her wrist. He was twisting it. He was explaining, with the terrible cheerful patience of a man who is enjoying himself, exactly what he thought her wrist was worth. Ysenne's guards moved. She saw them move, and she saw the whole shape of what was about to happen. The guards were House Vaal. They were very good, and the 6 haulers would be broken and the station would seethe. and it would be a diplomatic incident on a nothing station in a nothing orbit, and her father would hear about it, and she would be, once again, the daughter who could not travel quietly. She raised one finger. Her guard stopped quivering. And that was when Adan Reyes walked past her with a crate of peppers on his shoulder. He did not put the crate down. He said, "Kes," not loudly. The Kelthier's head came around at the sound of his own name, which he had not given, and which nobody on Marrow knew. "Your left knee's a nader pattern replacement," Adan said, conversational, still holding the crate. "Second generation. The lock pin sits 4 centimeters below the joint line, and it seizes at low temperature, which is why you've been favoring it since you came through the lock, and why you took the near stool instead of the wall stool, and why you're standing with your weight on your right. If I put my boot through that pin, the whole assembly cracks and you spend a year on a mining moon learning to walk again, and you will never do gate work anywhere in the Reach ever again, because nobody hires a doorman who can't stand." Silence the whole bar. "Or," Adan said, "you let go of her wrist and I'll cook you something and we'll all have had a quiet night." The Kelthier looked at him. Ysenne watched the man's face, and she watched him do the arithmetic, and she watched the arithmetic come out wrong, because the Kelthier was 300 kilos of augmented muscle, and the human was a cook with a box of vegetables, and there was no version of the sum in which the cook won. The Kelthier let go of the girl's wrist. He did not decide to. Ysenne was certain of that then and forever after. His hand simply opened, the way a hand opens when some very old part of the animal brain, the part below arithmetic, has looked at a thing and recognized it and started screaming. "Sit down," Adan said. "It's fish tonight." The Kelthier sat down. His 5 friends sat down. Adan carried his peppers into the kitchen and, 20 minutes later, brought out 6 plates and set them on the table and asked them, courteously, how the Ossuar run had been. And Ysenne Ithri-Vaal sat in the corner of a filthy bar on a nothing station with her heart going hard and fast under her sternum, and she reached for the record, the way she always did, and found nothing there. 9 years of nothing. A blank. For the first time in her life, she understood that a blank was not the same thing as an absence. A blank was a shape. It was a hole cut very carefully in the world, in the exact outline of a man, and someone had done the cutting on purpose. She went back to her cabin. She sat down. She did not sleep, because the Sethiri did not need much sleep, and because she had begun, at last, 11 days late, to look asterisk. She started with the peppers. He had not put the crate down. Why had he not put the crate down? Because a man who puts a crate down has committed to a fight. A man who keeps a crate on his shoulder is telling everyone in the room that no fight is going to happen, and is therefore not challenging anyone, and is therefore not giving the drunk anything to defend. He had known the Kelthier's name. He had known the model of his prosthetic knee, in the dark, from across a room, from a limp. He had told the man, in perfect detail, exactly how his life would end, not his body, his asterisk life. His trade, his future, the one thing a gate thug actually cared about, and then he had offered him dinner. He had unmade a man's will in 9 seconds and then fed him, and it had cost him nothing, and he had not enjoyed it. She had watched his face while he said it. There had been no pleasure in it anywhere. "I know what power smells like," he had said. Ysenne sat in the dark, and her memory, her perfect, merciless, indexed memory, began, without her permission, to lay every moment of the last 11 days side by side, and to look for the pattern. It found one. She wished later that it had not. The pattern was not a single thing. It was 100 small things, and each one of them alone was nothing at all. Ysenne laid them out in her mind the way an archivist lays out fragments on a light table, and she made herself be honest, which was the hardest discipline her caste taught. Item: on the 3rd day, a Threnn-built cargo hauler had docked, one of the old military tenders that had been sold off cheap after the unraveling, and Adan had glanced at its hull and said, "To nobody, fourth ministry, reconditioned." And he had been right, and there was no marking on that hull that said so, because the fourth ministry had scrubbed its serials before it burned its records. Item, he read. He read constantly in the slack hours on a cracked slate with a chipped corner, and she had never once seen what he was reading, because the screen was always angled away, which was itself a habit, and habits like that were taught. Item, he sat with his back to a wall, always. In the kitchen he stood behind the counter with the hatch in his eyeline. In Mara's he took the stool at the end. On the concourse he walked on the side that let him see the length of it. He did this without thinking about it, which meant he had done it for years, which meant that at some point in his short life someone had made it necessary. Item, when the station's alarm klaxon had gone off on the 7th day, a false alarm, a bad sensor on deck 1, every person in the kitchen had flinched and Adan had not. He had turned his head toward the sound with an expression of mild professional interest, and then he had turned back to the grill. That was not courage. Ysenne knew courage, her guards had it. This was something else. This was a man for whom alarms had stopped meaning danger a long time ago, because he had heard so many that his body had filed them under asterisk noise. Item, he was gentle with the children on the low ring, and they swarmed him, and he knew all their names, and he carried sweets in his pocket, and when the smallest of them fell off a railing and split her lip, he had her stabilized and dressed and laughing in 90 seconds, and the field dressing he used was not a civilian pattern. Item, 9 years of nothing. Item, an old Ilvit conscript had put his palm flat on a counter and offered him the salute of a witness. Ysenne assembled it all and turned it and looked at it, and arrived at a conclusion she immediately hated. He was a soldier. That was the easy answer. Some special forces unit, some grubby human black program, discharged young and dumped out here to rot. It explained the wall sitting and the field dressing, and the flat, unbothered eyes. It did not explain Das. It did not explain the peppers. Above all, it did not explain the thing that had begun to bother her most, which was that Adan Ray's was asterisk kind asterisk, and not the performative kindness of a man buying absolution, but the slow, structural kindness of someone who had decided, deliberately, at some point, that kindness would be the shape of the rest of his life, and who worked at it every single day the way you work at a language you were not born speaking. Soldiers did not do that. Soldiers came home hard or came home broken. They did not come home and spend 4 years learning exactly how much citrus a Sethiri could taste before she noticed the fish. She began cautiously to ask him things. Where did you learn to cook? Places. That is not an answer. It's the only one that's true. He was chopping something green with a knife that was clearly his own, old steel, no cereal, an edge you could shave with. You learn to cook in a place, and then the place is gone, and what's left is the cooking. So the honest answer is places. Name one. He looked up. It was the first time she had seen him hesitate. There was a house on a hill, he said, with a red tile roof, and a woman named Nira who ran the kitchen, and she had a stone mortar so old the bowl of it was worn down to a finger's thickness. She taught me to grind pepper without cracking the seed. She said the seed was where the anger lived, and you didn't want the anger, you wanted the warmth. Where was this? It's gone, Adan said. The house, the hill, the town under the hill, all of it. War. Consequences, he said, and went back to the greens and did not speak again for an hour. 3 days later, the ship came in that ended her innocence, and it came in without a transponder. She was on the observation gallery when it happened, a long, cold tube of scratched plex where the station kept its one luxury, a view of Kithra's storm belt turning slowly below, endless ochre and umber and lightning that walked in white threads across a face the size of 100 worlds. She went there most nights. The Sethiri did not dream, and the storm was the closest thing she had found to it. The ship slid up out of the cloud tops like something surfacing. It was small, black, wrong-shaped, human-built, she thought, but not to any commercial pattern she knew, and her memory contained every commercial pattern there was. It had no name on the hull. It had no registry beacon. It came into the docking cradle with the fussy, unhurried precision of a pilot who had done this 10,000 times, and it did not ask permission, and station traffic control did not ask it to. Ysenne watched it dock. Then she went down to the concourse, because she was the third daughter of the Valen ascendancy, and she was very tired of being handled. The woman who came off that ship was human, perhaps 60, with iron-colored hair cropped to the skull and a coat that was too good for marrow. She walked like someone whose knees hurt and who had decided, decades ago, not to care. She had two people with her, a young man with a case and a heavy-set woman with the dead calm face of professional violence. They went to the kitchen. Of course they went to the kitchen. Ysenne followed at a distance and stopped in the shadow of the hatch, and she was not proud of eavesdropping, and she did it anyway, and she would do it again. The kitchen was empty. Adan was at the grill with his back to the door, which was the first time she had ever seen him with his back to a door, and she understood, watching him, that he had known this ship was coming from the moment it broke cloud, and possibly from the moment it entered the system, and possibly for weeks. "Hello, Cyril," he said. "Hello, Adan." The old woman lowered herself onto a stool with a small grunt. "You look well, you look settled. That's a horrible word, isn't it? Settled." "It's a good word. It's an obituary." She looked around the kitchen, the vines, the peppers, the hydroponic racks, the 12 stools. Her face did something complicated. For years, and this is what you built. A soup kitchen on a rock. You want soup. I want to talk about Harvell. The spatula in Adan's hand did not stop moving. Ysenne, watching from the dark of the hatchway, saw that clearly, and it frightened her more than a flinch would have. "No," he said. "You haven't heard the Ivory Sept declared for the Harvell line 8 months ago. They've taken the Ossuar corridor. They've got 4 client systems and a 5th in a month. They're running the old Threnn playbook with better marketing, and they've started a reconciliation register, which is what you call a slave census when you have a public relations department." He turned to Fillet. "The census closed on Ossuar in the spring. 800,000 names. Their next move is the Valen border, because they need the Reach corridor, and because the ascendancy is the only polity out here with laws that would inconvenience them. And the fastest way to break the ascendancy is to break its succession, which means the Valen court, which means the houses, which means a war of cousins." "Silence." "You have been paying attention," Cyril said softly. "I read the news," said Adan Reyes. "No." "Adan." "No, Cyril." 3 thrones, the old woman said, and Ysenne's crest went cold, root to tip, because there was a weight in the way the woman said it, the weight of a phrase that has been said in rooms where terrible decisions get made. 3 thrones in 6 years. Nobody in the history of this galaxy has ever done what you did once, and you did it 3 times before you were old enough to drink legally on your own homeworld, and you have been hiding in an asterisk pantry ever since. "Yes," Adan said. "Threnn," said Cyril, "the Iron Choir, the Ashen Throne of Ossuar, 400 billion people out from under the Dominion, the choir's creche camps opened. Ossuar's kings in a courtroom instead of a mass grave, and that was asterisk your asterisk insistence. That was you screaming at me across a table." "Yes. So don't stand there and tell me you don't do this anymore, because you are the only living human being who has ever taken apart an empire without a fleet, and there is a new one growing on the Valen border, and in 5 years it will be too big to take apart, and you know that, and you are asterisk frying fish." The spatula stopped. Adan turned around. Ysenne saw his face, and every ordinary thing she had ever thought about him died. It was not rage. It would have been easier if it had been rage. It was a terrible, level, exhausted quiet, the face of a man looking at something he has looked at every night for 12 years. "Say the number," he said. Cyril's jaw tightened. "Adan." "Say the number, Cyril. You came all the way out here. Say the whole thing or don't say any of it." "That is not fair." 211,000, Adan said. "That's the low estimate. That's the Ilvid Assembly's number for the Ash Weeks, for what happened between the day the Dominion's ledger went public and the day the Second Fleet decided who it belonged to. 19 months of a very large thing dying, and things that large do not die politely, and everybody who starved in the Reach corridor that winter starved because the grain ship stopped, and the grain ship stopped because the ministries stopped talking to each other, and the ministries stopped talking to each other because a boy from a habitat put a key in a lock. The Dominion killed 9 million a year, Cyril said hard. Every year, for 240 years. Do that arithmetic if you want arithmetic. "I have," Adan said. "Every night. It comes out the same way every night, and the same way means I would do it again, and that is not the comfort you think it is, Cyril. That is the worst sentence in my life." Nobody said anything. He turned back to the grill because the fish was burning, and because he was a man who did not let food burn. "I'm not a moral man," he said to the wall. "I'm not even a good one. I'm a man who was very, very good at one specific thing, and the thing was finding the seam in something enormous and putting my thumb in it and pushing until it split, and I did it 3 times, and every time it split it fell on somebody. And I have decided that the rest of my life is going to be small, small on purpose. I feed 40 people a day, and I keep the water clean, and I know every child on this ring by name, and none of that balances anything. I'm not stupid. It doesn't balance, nothing balances. But it's asterisk additive. Do you understand the difference? Everything I did for you was subtraction. This is the first thing I have ever done in my life that adds." Cyril Anvik sat on her stool in the little green kitchen for a long moment. "They'll come for you," she said at last. "You know that. The Sept has been buying Threnn intelligence assets for 2 years. Somebody's going to sell them the file eventually, and when they get it, they won't recruit you. They'll erase you because you are the only weapon in the galaxy that has ever worked against something like them, and they are not fools." "Then they'll come for me," said Adan, "and I'll be here cooking." "You are 27 years old." "I know exactly how old I am," he said. "I'm the only person in the long room who ever kept count." Ysenne got back to her cabin without remembering the walk. She sat down on the edge of her bunk in her coat, and she stared at the bulkhead, and her memory did what her memory always did, which was to give her everything at once, in perfect order, with no mercy at all. Threnn, the Iron Choir, the Ashen Throne of Ossuar. 3 states, not kingdoms in the small sense, not little client worlds, powers. The Dominion had held 1/3 of the Reach. The Iron Choir had been the great theocratic engine of the Corward Drift for 190 years, and its creche camps had bred conscripts from stolen children, and it had shattered. Everyone said asterisk shattered asterisk, as though it had been dropped 9 years ago, when its own choir masters woke one morning to find that every congregation in the Drift had simultaneously received the private correspondence of the 9th chair. And Ossuar, the Ashen Throne. Ysenne had been 18 when Ossuar fell, and she had watched the trials on the public feeds with her tutors, and she remembered, in the way only her people remembered, a court of law with 140 defendants in it, kings and ministers and generals, alive in the dock, being asked questions by lawyers. Nobody had understood why they were alive. Everyone had expected the mob. Everyone had expected the wall and the ditch, because that was what always happened. That was what had happened to every tyrant in the history of every species. And instead there had been a asterisk courtroom asterisk, and the Ossuar reconstruction had held, and it was, 12 years on, the only successful post-tyranny transition anyone in the Reach could name. That was your insistence, the old woman had said. That was you screaming at me across a table. Ysenne Ithri-Vaal put her face in her hands, which was not a Sethiri gesture. She had learned it, unconsciously, in 11 days, from watching a human do it when he was tired. 3 of the largest tyrannies in living memory, the great unsolved problems of modern history. The unraveling that scholars could not explain, the choir's collapse that theologians called an act of God, the Ossuar courtroom that jurists still taught as a miracle. One man, 27 years old, no record. He is nobody, she had said, 11 days ago in this room, in this chair, in the voice of a woman who knew how the world was arranged. She had never in her life been so completely, so publicly, so permanently wrong, and the worst of it, the part that she would carry, was that there was no one she could blame for the error but herself. The record had not lied to her. The record had been full of him. Every archive she had ever studied, every collapse she had ever mapped, every hinge of the last 12 years of galactic history had his fingerprints on it. The record had simply never learned his name. And she, an Ithri, a daughter of the caste that existed to see, had looked directly at him across a counter, day after day, and seen a cook. She waited 2 days before she confronted him, and the waiting was not patience. It was fear. Not fear of him, she examined that possibility carefully and dismissed it, and she was right too. Fear of the conversation, because the Ithri had a proverb, the question you ask is the answer you must carry. Once she asked, she would know, and once she knew, she could not unknow, because that was not a thing her species was capable of. Every human she had ever met had the extraordinary luxury of forgetting. She had never envied them anything so much. She asked on the 15th day at the end of the night shift, when the kitchen was empty and the vines dripped condensation onto the deck, and the only sound was the station breathing. "You brought down the Threnn Dominion," she said. Adan raised, did not stop wiping the counter. "Yes," he said. He said it the way you would confirm a delivery. Ysenne had prepared for many responses: denial, anger, a demand to know how much she had heard, a lie. She had not prepared for this. She had to sit down. "And the iron choir?" "Yes." "And Ossuar?" "Yes." "How old were you?" she said, and heard her own voice crack, which she had not permitted since she was a child. "When you started." Adan folded the cloth. He hung it on its hook. He came around the counter and sat down on the stool too along from hers, and he looked at his hands, and he was quiet for a while. 19, he said. "I was 19 when I went into Threnn. I was 21 when it started to come apart. It didn't finish falling until I was 23, and by then I was already inside the choir, because the long room doesn't waste an asset, and an asset is what I was." The long room. "An office," he said. "A very small one. Earth doesn't have a fleet worth the name. You know that. Everyone knows that. Humans came out into all this." He moved one hand vaguely at the hull, at the storm, at the galaxy, "about 90 years ago, and we found that we were poor and slow and short-lived, and outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by species with better ships, better bodies, better everything. So we did what people do when they can't win a fight. We looked for another game." "Espionage." "That's a clean word for it." He laced his fingers. "The long room started as 40 people in a basement asking a stupid question. The question was, why has no one ever taken an empire apart from the inside? And the answer, it turned out, was very simple and very ugly. Nobody had ever done it because nobody could be nobody." Ysenne frowned. "I do not follow." "Sethiri can't lie," Adan said. "Not really. Your crest gives you away. Your caste marks tell anyone who you are. Your memory means you can't hold a false life in your head without it grinding against the true one. Kelthir have blood-scent hierarchy. A low caste can't stand in a high room without every nose in it knowing. Grelin bond pair for life and can't be run alone. The Threnn had a caste brand cut into every arm in the Dominion. You literally could not walk into a ministry building unless your skin said you belonged there. He shrugged. Every species out here is legible asterisk. That's the word we used. Legible. Their societies work because everyone can read everyone, and that's beautiful. Honestly, it's a beautiful thing. It's why your court doesn't need locks on the doors. But it means an empire out here has never, in 10,000 years, had to worry about the one thing that keeps every human tyrant awake at night. Which is that the man carrying the water might be someone else, said Adan. Ysenne sat very still. Humans are illegible, he said. We lie. We lie constantly, casually, to each other and to ourselves. We can hold a false name for years and feel it become comfortable. We have no caste marks, no scent, no crest, no bond that betrays us. We're short-lived, so we age out of our own histories. I can look 40 in 6 years if I let myself. We're mediocre at almost everything, which means nobody watches us. And we can't wait asterisk. Not the way you wait. Your people wait beautifully, patiently for centuries, but you wait as yourselves. We can wait as no one asterisk. We can put a man in a kitchen and leave him there for 2 years, and he will scrub pots and learn names and be forgotten by everyone above him. And that is the most powerful position that has ever existed in a hierarchical state, and no species out here has ever had a defense against it, because no species out here ever needed one. That is, Ysenne started again, that is monstrous. Yes, Adan agreed, it is. He told her because she asked, and because he had clearly been waiting a very long time for someone to ask who was not going to congratulate him. He went into the Threnn Dominion at 19, with a forged conscript brand cut into his own arm, real cutting, real scar, done without anesthetic in a room on a freighter, because the Dominion's brand readers could detect a synthetic scar and could not detect a real one. He took a job in the sub-basement of the 4th Ministry of Provisioning, in the kitchens, because the kitchens fed the clerks and the clerks were the empire. He worked there for 26 months. Nobody in a ministry has ever looked at a kitchen boy, he said. Not once, in 240 years. And the thing about a ministry is that it runs on documents, and documents run on people, and people get hungry at 11 and again at 4. I learned 200 names. I learned who was frightened and who was in debt, and who had a daughter in the labor levy that his supervisor was quietly extending as leverage. I learned who hated whom. I learned who had signed things they wished they hadn't. It took 2 years, and at the end of it I had not power. I want you to understand. I never had 1 gram of power. What I had was a asterisk map asterisk. A map of what? Of the seam, Adan said. Everything that big is made of pieces, and the pieces are held together by a story. The Dominion story was, we are permanent, we are righteous, and we all did it together. Those 3 things were the load-bearing wall. And I found out, sitting on an upturned crate peeling roots for 6 hours a day, listening to frightened clerks, that not one single person in that building actually believed the third one. Every ministry thought the others had done the worst of it. Every officer thought his own hands were clean, and the man across the hall was the butcher. They had spent 2 centuries building a machine where nobody was responsible, and it had worked so well that nobody was responsible, and that meant nobody would defend it. All I had to do was hand them a piece of paper that said, in their own handwriting, who had done what. The ledger, Ysenne breathed. The ledger, he said. The Ilvit ledger already existed. That's the part everyone gets wrong. I didn't write it. The Dominion wrote it. They wrote everything down, because bureaucracies always do, because a crime committed by an institution has to be authorized in triplicate. 12,000 pages. Every officer who signed for the reduction of Ilvit, every account that paid them, every ship that carried the ash. It sat in a vault under the 4th Ministry for 11 years, and nobody had ever read it, because nobody wanted to be the man who had read it. And you took it. I copied it, said Adan, over 14 months, 11 pages at a time in a bread tin. He almost smiled, and it was awful. And then I gave it away. That's all. That's the whole trick, your clarity. That's the great secret of how the Threnn Dominion fell. A kitchen boy gave 400 billion people a document that told them the truth about themselves, all in the same week, and the Dominion could not survive its own paperwork. Ysenne found that her hands were shaking. She looked at them with detached surprise. "And then," she said. "And then," said Adan Reyes, "it fell on people." He told her the rest, and he told it flatly, without excuse, and it was the flatness that broke her. The Second Fleet had mutinied, not to free anyone, but because two admirals each thought the other was about to have him arrested, and the Reach corridor had closed for 11 weeks, and the grain ships that fed 6 billion people on 4 client worlds had stopped. There had been a food riot on Nen that killed 30,000. There had been a chemical release at a ministry facility when the technicians ran, and the wind had gone the wrong way. There had been, in the last spasms of it, a governor on Ilvit who had understood that the ledger meant a rope, and who had ordered the labor camps cleared, and had gotten 3 of them done before his own guards shot him. 211,000, low estimate. "I knew," Adan said. "That's the thing I need you to understand, because everyone always wants to give me the excuse, and I'm not going to take it. I knew asterisk. The long room ran the models. We knew that a state of that size does not die cleanly. We sat around a table, Cyril, me, 4 analysts, an ethicist we brought in because we thought that would help, and we looked at a number between 150,000 and 400,000, and we compared it to 9 million a year forever, and we made a decision. And I was 21, and I was the one who had to carry the tin, and I said yes." "You were a child." "I was old enough to do it," he said, "so I was old enough to have done it." The storm turned below them. Far off in the station, a pump cycled. "Do you know what I was doing?" he said. "On the day the corridor closed, I was in a safe house on Tessel with a radio, listening to the grain ship stop. And there was a boy on the news feed, a Threnn boy, 9 or 10, standing in a queue for a food station that wasn't going to open, and he had his little brother on his hip, and he kept looking down the road. Just looking down the road. And I sat there and I understood that he did not know my name, and he never would, and that was correct, because if he knew my name he'd have somewhere to put it, and he shouldn't have anywhere to put it. It shouldn't be a man. It should just be weather asterisk." He rubbed his face. "That's what I decided to be, weather, and weather doesn't get to have a conscience, so I had to be the one who kept it for it." "That is not sane," Ysenne said quietly. "No," Adan agreed, "it isn't. But I kept count, which is more than the long room ever did, and I made them keep the kings alive on Ossuar, and that's the only thing in the whole 9 years that I'm actually proud of." "Why?" "Because on Ossuar I finally understood what I'd gotten wrong." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were very steady. "Threnn, I broke it and I left. I took the roof off 400 billion people and I walked away and left them standing in the rain, and the rain killed 200,000 of them. The choir, same thing. I let the congregations have the letters and I got on a ship and I told myself the work was done. And it wasn't done. It's never done. Taking a thing out of the world leaves a asterisk hole, and if nobody stands in the hole, something worse crawls into it. So on Ossuar I refused to move until they gave me a courtroom." He said it without any pride at all. "It took 4 months. I sat in a room and I fought with my own service and with 3 governments, and Cyril thought I'd lost my nerve. And when it was done there were 140 of them in the dock, and it was slow and boring and undignified, and the mob outside screamed for a week, and 11 years later Ossuar still has a parliament. It's a bad parliament. It's corrupt and it's slow and it argues about drainage." He almost smiled again, and this time it was real. "It's the best thing I ever built. It's the only thing I ever built." Ysenne walked back to her cabin through the low ring, past the sleeping quarters and the recycler and the small green nook where the children grew beans in a stolen tray, and she did not go inside. She stood at the plex and looked at Kithra, and she made herself take out the thing she had been refusing to take out for 2 days. The stone. There was a stone on Ilvet. She had seen it when she was 19, on her first state visit, standing in a cold wind with her mother's people around her. It sat at the edge of the memorial field where the reduction pits had been, and the field was full of names, 10,000 columns of names, and every one of them was carved and dated and attributed, because the Ilvet were also a remembering people, and that was why the ascendancy had taken them in. And at the edge of all those names there was one blank stone, unmarked. No inscription, no name, no date, just gray rock waist-high, worn smooth on top. She had asked her guide what it was, and the old Ilvet woman had said, "That is for the one who did not stay." Ysenne had assumed it was a religious thing, a god or an ancestor or a metaphor. She had filed it and moved on because it was a small thing and she had a schedule. And now, standing at the plex above a storm, she remembered perfectly, cruelly in full color, that the top of that stone was worn smooth, and that it was worn smooth because for 12 years the people of Ilvet had been walking up to it, one at a time, and putting their palms flat on it. The salute of a witness. They didn't know his name either. Nobody knew his name. He had made sure of it deliberately for 9 years, and he had done it not out of vanity but out of something much closer to shame, and 11 days ago she had looked at him across a counter and thought, "He is nobody." Ysenne Ithri-Vaal, daughter of a memory-caste, stood in the dark and understood that she had been telling a lie about the world for her entire life, that a record was not a person, that the great and terrible acts of history did not have names on them, and the ones that did were mostly noise, that her whole civilization measured worth with a ruler that could not see the largest thing in the room, and that a young man with a burned scar on his wrist had taken the roof off 3 empires before his 25th birthday, had counted every single body it cost, and had then chosen freely, sanely, at enormous personal cost, to spend the rest of his short human life making sure that 40 people on a nothing station got a hot meal and clean water. Not because it balanced. He had told her it did not balance. He had been very clear. Because it added. She put her palm flat against the cold plex and held it there, and did not care who saw. Cyril Anvik did not leave. Her black ship sat in the cradle for 6 days, and every morning the old woman came to the kitchen and ate breakfast, and every morning she did not ask him again, and every morning the not asking got louder. On the 4th of those days, she found Ysenne in the observation gallery, and sat down beside her without invitation, which no one had done to Ysenne in her adult life. "You've worked it out," Cyril said. "Yes." "Are you going to tell your father?" Ysenne considered the question honestly, because she had already spent 2 nights considering it. "No." "Why not?" "Because he would try to buy him," she said. "And when that failed, he would try to keep him. And when that failed, he would decide that a weapon he cannot hold is a weapon aimed at him, and he would have him killed, and he would be right by the logic of statecraft, and I would have to watch." Cyril Anvik laughed, a short, unpleasant bark. "You're brighter than your file." "You have a file on me." "Child, I have a file on everyone." The old woman rubbed her knees. "I've had one on you since you were 14. 3rd daughter, Ithri-Caste, brilliant, arrogant, unmarriageable, keeps getting sent on tour to nowhere because the court doesn't know what to do with a princess who reads treaties for pleasure and corrects the chancellor in public." "That is a fair summary." "It's a asterisk file asterisk," Cyril said. "Files aren't fair, that's rather the point of them." She looked out at the storm. "You know, he wasn't the only one. There were 11 of us in the first intake. Adan was the 6th through the door. That's what they called him in the room for years, the 6th. Nobody used names." "Where are the other 10? "6 dead," said Cyril. 2 mad. One is a very successful arms broker on Texel, and I'd shoot him myself if I could get close enough. And one," she said, runs a soup kitchen." She was quiet a moment. "He was the best of us," she said. "Not the cleverest. Marit was cleverer, and Marit's ashes are in a jar in my desk. He was the best because of the thing you've noticed, which is that he counts. Everyone else in that program learned very quickly not to, because it's the only way to stay upright. He never did. He carried every one of them out of Threnn on his back, and he's still carrying them. And I have watched what it does to him, and I have used him anyway, every time, for 9 years." She turned her head. "Do you understand what I am confessing to you, girl?" "Yes," said Ysenne. "Good, then understand this too." Saryl's voice went flat. "I would do it again this afternoon if he said yes. Because I have seen the Sept's reconciliation register, and I have seen the pens they are building on Ossuar's old moon, and in 5 years there will be a new Dominion sitting on your border with a better navy and a smile. And there is exactly one man alive who has ever done anything about a thing like that, and he is frying fish." "Then ask him again." "I've asked him 9 times in 4 years, Saryl said. "He says no. He'll keep saying no. And the horror of it, your clarity, the thing that keeps me up is that I think he's right, and I think being right is going to get a great many people killed." The Sept did not need to be invited. They came on the 22nd day, and they came in a hauler with a legitimate Ossuar transponder and a manifest full of medical stock, which was how you took a station that had 4 security officers and a grelin with a stamp. Ysenne was in the kitchen when it happened. She was, in fact, chopping vegetables badly, because she had insisted on being taught, and Adan had handed her a knife without comment, and then spent 4 days telling her to slow down. The station's lights went amber. Then they went out. Then the emergency strips came up red, and every hatch in the ring locked with a sound like 100 rifles being cocked at once, and the public address channel opened with a hiss of a system being taken from the outside. "Marrow Station," a voice, deep, unhurried, Kelthier. "This is Commissioner Vartesk of the Ivory Sept, acting under the reconciliation mandate. Your station is now under Sept administration. Remain where you are. Compliance is a mercy extended once." Adan Ray set down his cloth. Ysenne watched him change. It was not dramatic. That was the horrifying part. He did not tense. He did not reach for a weapon. His face did not harden. He simply arrived. Some quality of half-attention that she had assumed was his nature, that had been there in every moment of every day for 22 days, folded away, and what stood behind the counter was a man who was entirely, terribly present. "How many hatches on this deck?" he said. 3, she had counted, of course. She counted everything. "Which one is the guard patrol going to use?" "The forward one. It is the widest and it connects to the trunk corridor." "Good." He was already moving, pulling the kitchen's floor panel up with 2 fingers hooked in a gap she had never noticed was a gap. "You've got about 90 seconds to decide something." "Decide what?" "Whether you're a princess," he said, "or whether you're a woman in a kitchen." The panel came up. There was a crawl space under it, and in the crawl space, packed in oilcloth, there were things she did not want to look at. A slim case, a dark bundle, a flat gray slab the size of a book with no markings on it at all. Adan took only the slab. He left the rest. "They're not here for the station," he said. "The station's worth nothing." They came in on a fake Ossuar manifest, which means they had 6 weeks of prep, which means they knew what was in the cradle before they burned. They're here for you. For me. You're the 3rd daughter of a house that would have to answer if you disappeared, and you're stranded in a system with no witnesses. He slid the panel back. Take a princess from the Vaal in court and you don't get a ransom. You get an * war of cousins, and everyone spends 4 years accusing each other, and the border goes soft. And while they're arguing about who has you, the Sept walks the Reach corridor. It's clean. It's very clean. If it were my operation, I'd have done exactly this." Ysenne's mouth was dry. "And you?" "They'll take me for a cook, same as you did," Adan said, without any malice at all, and it landed like a hammer. That's the plan. That's always the plan. The Sept had 40 soldiers, which was 36 more than they needed, and a commissioner, which was one more than they should have brought. Vartesk walked into the concourse of Marrow Station 40 minutes later with the calm of a man doing paperwork. He was Kelthier, huge, immaculate, his collar plate chased in the ivory of his order, and he had a voice made for briefing rooms. He had them bring everyone, dock workers, haulers, children, the old, Mara and her niece, Das on his bad legs. 116 people herded onto the concourse floor under the guns of soldiers who looked bored, which was the worst thing about them. He had Ysenne brought to the front, and her 2 house guards were already dead. She saw them laid out, and her memory took the image and would keep it forever, and she did not look away because she was Ithri, and it was her duty to see. Your serene clarity, Tesk inclined his head with genuine, unbearable courtesy. You are unharmed and you will remain so. You are a guest of the Sept. I am a hostage of the Sept. You are an argument of the Sept, Tesk said. You'll find it more comfortable than it sounds. He turned to the crowd and raised his voice slightly, and it filled the concourse without effort. Marrow Station is not being punished. Marrow Station is being administered. In 4 hours my ship departs with the princess aboard. Your reactor will be left intact. Your people will be left breathing. In exchange, I require one small thing, and then I will be gone from your lives forever. He let it hang. He was good. Ysenne, who had grown up among the finest manipulators in the Reach, noted with a distant and furious professionalism that he was very good. There is a human on the station, said Vartesk. The concourse was silent. Somewhere a child began to cry and was hushed. The Sept has purchased a great many old Threnn files, Tesk went on pleasantly. Most of them are worthless. Bureaucracies lie to themselves. But one of them was a report written by a very junior investigator of the Fourth Ministry, 3 months before the unraveling, and it concerned an anomaly in the provisioning kitchens, and it contained a description, and it was ignored, and the man who wrote it was shot for wasting the ministry's time. He smiled. The Sept does not shoot its investigators. The Sept reads asterisk. He walked slowly along the front rank of the crowd. A human male, now aged approximately 27 standard, scar on the inner left wrist. He is called in the only file that survived the 6th asterisk. He took apart the Dominion. He took apart the choir. He took apart the Ashen Throne. Tesk's voice never rose. He is on this station. He has been on this station for 4 years, and he thinks nobody knows, and he is standing in this room right now listening to me. Nobody moved. So, said Vartesk, here is the arrangement. You will point at him. One of you, any of you, it costs nothing. Point at him, and I take him and the princess, and I leave, and Marrow lives. He stopped walking. Or you say nothing, and in 10 minutes I will begin removing this station's population from the equation, starting with the smallest, and I will keep going until someone's arm comes up. And I want to be very clear, because I am not a cruel man and I dislike misunderstanding. I would rather you pointed. The silence stretched. Ysenne could see him, Adan. 3rd row left, standing between Ambu the dockmaster and a hauler in a grease-stained coat in his patched coverall, with his hands loose at his sides. He was the most ordinary thing in the room. He had made himself the most ordinary thing in the room. It was, she realized, the most extraordinary act of will she had ever witnessed. 116 people. Every single one of them knew him. He had fed all of them. He had fixed their pipes and named their children and pulled their splinters and paid for Mara's niece's schooling out of a wage that was mostly barter. Not one arm came up. 10 seconds. 20. Vartesk waited with the patience of a man who has done this before and knows exactly how long it takes. 30 seconds, he said, is longer than any station I have ever administered. You should be proud. He gestured. A soldier walked into the crowd and took a child by the arm, the small one, the one who had split her lip on the railing, 6 years old, and she screamed, and her mother lunged and was put down with a rifle butt. And Adan Reyes stepped out of the third row. "Hey," he said, "kids got nothing to do with it." He said it the way he'd told a drunk Kelthier that it was fish tonight. Vartesk turned. He looked at the young man in the patched coverall for a long moment, and Ysenne watched the commissioner's face and saw, quite clearly, the thing she had felt herself on the first day. The small, automatic, contemptuous relief of a powerful person confirming that the object in front of him is not a threat. "You," Tesk said, "are the cook." "I am," said Adan. "You are the cook asterisk." Tesk seemed almost disappointed. He walked forward until he was 2 meters away, and he looked down from his considerable height at a young human with a burned scar and bad haircut and flour on his sleeve. "I confess I expected something. In the file, they made you sound like a god." "They always do," Adan said. "That's the mistake." "What is?" "Thinking it takes a god." Adan looked up at him, and Ysenne, watching, saw his eyes, and they were the eyes of a man reading a room the way she read an archive. "Let the girl go, she's 6. Let the child go, Commissioner, and I'll walk onto your ship and you'll have everything you came for and a stack of commendations. You'll be the man who caught the 6th. That's a career. That's a asterisk throne for someone like you, and it costs you nothing but a 6-year-old girl you don't want anyway." Tesk's tongue moved behind his teeth. He gestured lazily. The soldier let the child go, and she ran, and someone caught her and folded her away into the crowd. "You are very calm," Tesk observed. "I've been in worse rooms." "You are also," said Tesk, "the most valuable object in this arm of the galaxy, and I have not yet decided whether it is safer to deliver you or to shoot you where you stand." "That's fair," said Adan Reyes. "Honestly, that's the right question. If you were smart, you'd shoot me." He glanced once at the crowd, at 116 people who had stood in silence for 30 seconds when 30 seconds was longer than any station Vartesk had ever administered. "But you're not going to, because you can't take a corpse to your sept and prove it was me. And because a man who can bring back the 6th alive asterisk and use him, or break him, or turn him," he shrugged, "that man doesn't stay a commissioner, does he?" Vartesk was very still. And Ysenne Ithri-Vaal, standing under the guns with her guard's blood drying on the deck, felt every hair on her arms rise, because she had just watched a young man in a flour-dusted coverall find the seam. "Bind him," said Vartesk. They bound him. 2 soldiers, hard restraints, a shock collar at the base of the neck, the kind used on augmented prisoners, which meant Tesk was not taking chances, which meant Tesk was frightened, which meant, Ysenne understood with a cold lurch, that Adan had wanted him frightened. They walked him to the front of the concourse and put him on his knees on the deck, 6 meters from her, in front of 116 people. "Now," Tesk said, adjusting his cuffs, "Under Commissioner Rynn will prepare the hauler. Your clarity, you will be escorted." "Commissioner," said Adan from his knees, "before you go, there's a slab in my left boot." Everything stopped. "It's not a weapon," Adan said. "Search it, scan it, do whatever you like. It's a data slab. I want you to read it before you put me on that ship, because if you don't, you're going to die about 11 hours from now, and I'd rather you didn't. On account of you dying is going to take this station with you." Tesk stared at him. Then he laughed, a genuine, rolling, delighted laugh, and gestured. And a soldier pulled the flat gray slab from Adan's boot and scanned it, and finding nothing but data, handed it up to the commissioner with the deference of a man handing over a live thing. "You want me to read," said Tesk. "You said the sept reads," said Adan. "It's the only interesting thing you've said." Tesk keyed the slab. Ysenne watched his eyes track down it, and she watched the laughter go out of his face by degrees, like a room being unlit lamp by lamp. "Where did you get this?" he said. "I read the news," said Adan Reyes. 4 years. Every shipping manifest that comes through this cradle, every broker's account, every commodity price in the Ossuar corridor, every transponder that lies about where it's been. You can learn almost anything from a dock commissioner if you're the man who unloads it and nobody looks at you. He shifted on his knees. Page 11. The Ossuar transponder on your hauler. It was bought through the Vesic brokerage, and the Vesic brokerage is a shell, and the shell is held by a trust, and the trust signatory is Sept Father Ivo's cousin Calvarn. Page 14. Calvarn has personally signed the retirement orders of the last 3 commissioners who ran an off-charter operation. Do you know what happened to them? They were reassigned, Tesk said. His voice had changed. They were *reconciled, said Adan. Page 15. Their names are on the register. Their families are in the pens on Ossuar's moon, which is where the Sept puts the relatives of men who know things. That's not cruelty, Commissioner. That's policy. It's a policy of a state that intends to live forever, and states that intend to live forever cannot afford men who have done deniable work. The concourse did not breathe. And page 19, Adan said, is a promotion schedule, Sept internal, dated 11 days before your hauler burned out of Ossuar. It lists the officer who will hold the rank of commissioner in the Reach corridor at the end of this quarter. He turned his head slowly and looked past Tesk at the tall Kelthir woman standing behind him with a rifle on her shoulder. Hello, Under Commissioner Rin. Rin did not move. She had gone absolutely rigid. You knew, Tesk said. He was not looking at Adan anymore. He had turned entirely and he was looking at her. Sir, you knew. She didn't, Adan said, and his voice cut across the concourse like a wire. Look at her, Tesk. Look at her face. She's finding out the same second you are, and she's just done the arithmetic you did, and she's got a brother in the register, doesn't she? 3rd column, page 15. Rin Kelthir, male, aged 41, held pending the good conduct of a serving officer. The rifle came off Rin's shoulder. It did not point anywhere. It simply came off her shoulder and her hands were not steady. This is a fabrication, said Tesk loudly to his 40 soldiers. This is exactly what he does. He is doing it right now in front of you. Yes, said Adan. I am. He said it plainly, on his knees, with a collar at his throat, and it landed harder than any denial in the galaxy could have. That's the whole trick, he said, and he was speaking to the soldiers now, all of them quietly, the way he spoke to a frightened clerk in a kitchen or a child with a split lip. I'm not clever. I don't have a fleet. All I have ever done in my entire life is hand people the truth about the thing they are standing inside and then get out of the way. You can check every page. You should check every page. I'd be insulted if you didn't. And when you finish checking, you're going to find out that the Sept sent 40 of you out here on a hauler with an off-book transponder to take a princess and start a war of cousins, and that when you come home, you are going to be the only 40 witnesses to a crime that the Sept father cannot ever admit to. Somebody in the ranks said very softly, the scuttling charge. Page 22, said Adan Reyes. Tesk moved. He was fast, Kelthir fast, 300 kilos moving like a whip, and he did not go for Adan, because Adan was on his knees and bound and could be killed at leisure. He went for the princess, because a commissioner who loses everything can still arrive at Ossuar holding the one thing the Sept actually wanted, and because men like Tesk always reach for the hostage. Ysenne saw him coming, and her memory did the useless perfect thing it always did. It told her, in exquisite detail, exactly how long it would take him to reach her, and exactly how little she could do about it. Adan was already moving. She never understood how he got out of the restraints. He told her later that he hadn't, that the soldier who bound him had used the standard Sept pattern, and the standard Sept pattern had a fault, and he had known about the fault for 4 years the way he knew about the water reclamation on Deck 2, because he had spent 4 years reading about everything that could ever walk through that airlock. He came up off the deck with his wrists still locked together and put the whole weight of himself into the side of Tesk's knee. It was not heroic. It was ugly and low and mechanical, and it worked. Tesk went down and came up with a blade, and the blade went into Adan's side, and Ysenne heard the sound it made and would hear it for the rest of her long, remembering life. And Adan Reyes, 27 years old, gasping with a knife in him, got his bound arms over the commissioner's head and dragged the collar plate down and put his forehead into the man's face, twice, and then rolled, and pinned the blade arm under his knee and stopped. He stopped. He knelt there, bleeding, with his hands locked and a broken man under him and the man's own knife lying on the deck by his shin, and he did not pick it up. "I'm not doing that anymore," he said, hoarse, to nobody, or perhaps to himself, or perhaps to a boy standing in a food queue on a world he had never seen. "I'm not doing that anymore." The shot came from behind him. Under Commissioner Rin lowered her rifle. Her face was wet. Tesk's chest had a hole in it, and his eyes were open, and it was over, and it had taken 4 seconds. Adan closed his eyes. "That's one," he said. Afterward, Ysenne would think that the surrender was the most extraordinary part, and that nobody would ever believe it, because it was not a battle and no one composed songs about arithmetic. He talked to them for 2 hours, bleeding, sitting against a crate, with Mara pressing a dressing into his side and swearing at him. Adan Reyes talked to 40 soldiers of the Ivory Sept, and he did not threaten them once. He told them what he had told Tesk, and he let them check it. He told them that if they went home, the charge in their own hold would go off in the Ossuar approach, and the Sept would hold a memorial. He told them there was a courtroom on Ossuar, a real one, slow and corrupt and arguing about drainage, and that a courtroom needed witnesses, and that 40 men and women who had carried Sept orders in their own hands were worth more to the future of 400 million people than any fleet in the Reach. He told them their families were in a pen on a moon, and that a document could open that pen, and that he had the document, and he was not going to keep it. Then he asked them to put their weapons on the deck, and one at a time, over the course of a very long hour, they did. Cyril Anvik watched it from the edge of the concourse, with an expression Ysenne could not read. When it was done, and the soldiers sat in ragged rows on the floor of a dockside station being handed soup by children, the old woman came and crouched beside him. "Give me the slab," she said. "No," said Adan. "Adan, that ledger is the Sept. That's 4 years of asterisk work. That's every account and every patron and the whole Harvel financial spine. Give it to the room, and in 18 months there is no Ivory Sept." "I know," he said, "that's the problem." He turned his head. He looked at Ysenne, filthy, blood-spattered, standing in a ruined coat with her dead guards behind her, and he held the slab out to her, and his hand was shaking with blood loss, and he held it out anyway. "There's a hole," he said. "Everything I take out of the world leaves one." Threnn left one, and 200,000 people fell into it. If Cyril takes this, the Sept comes apart in the dark, and nobody will ever know why, and something else will crawl into the hole, and in 30 years we'll do this again. He pushed it toward her. "So somebody has to stand in it. Somebody with a name and a court and a record, and the standing to make it asterisk law instead of weather." Ysenne did not take it, not yet. "You are giving this to the Valen ascendancy," she said carefully. "No," said Adan Reyes. "I'm giving it to the woman who chopped my vegetables badly for 4 days and never once pretended she was doing it well. I'm giving it to an Ithri who saw the worn-down stone on Ilvet and understood what it was. The ascendancy can have it after you've decided what it's for. My father will bury it, my court will trade it. Then don't let them." "I am a 3rd daughter," Ysenne said, and her voice cracked for the 2nd time in her life. "I have no army, I have no ministry, I have a memory and a knife I cannot use, and I am the least important person in my own palace." Adan Reyes smiled at her, A tired, bloody, entirely ordinary smile. The smile of a man behind a counter asking if you ate fish. "You have a perfect record of everything that happened in this room," he said. "You watched a commissioner of the Ivory Sept order the death of a 6-year-old on a neutral station. You saw it with a Setheri's eyes. There is not a court in this arm of the galaxy that can call an Ithri a liar." He nodded at the slab. "And you have 12,000 pages, and you have 40 witnesses who will testify, because I asked them to, and because they've read what's waiting for them at home. And you," she said, "they will need you asterisk, the one who assembled it. A document with no author is only a rumor. The court will demand the source. They will demand a name. They will demand a asterisk man asterisk." She stopped, because she had just heard what she was asking him for. 9 years of erasure. 9 years of a blank cut carefully in the shape of a man. A life spent making certain that no boy in any food queue on any world would ever have a name to put to the weather. The one thing he had left. The whole architecture of his piece. "Adan," she said, "no, I will find another way." "There isn't one," he said. "There never is. That's the joke." He let his head rest back against the crate, and he looked up at the amber lights and the vines and the ugly welded ceiling of the only home he had ever built. "It's all right, your clarity. I've been hiding from this for 4 years, and it turns out 4 years is exactly as long as it takes to notice that hiding is just another way of not standing in the hole." He held the slab out again, and this time Ysenne Ithri-Vaal took it. "Then say it," she said, "for the record. Say it properly, because I will remember it exactly, and one day I will have to say it in front of a court, and it must be your asterisk words." And Adan Reyes, 27 years old, a cook on a nothing station above a storm, said, "Name is Adan Reyes. In the long room they called me the Sixth. I took apart the Threnn Dominion when I was 21, and the Iron Choir when I was 24, and the Ashen Throne of Ossuar when I was 25. 211,000 people died because of what I did, and 9 million a year would have died if I hadn't, and I have never once been comfortable with that sentence, and I never will be." He breathed. "I am not sorry. I am not proud. I am available as a witness." Ysenne wrote it into herself, whole and forever, the way her people did. The yacht was repaired 3 weeks later. The Sep's hauler went to Ossuar with 40 witnesses and a princess and a ledger. And what happened after that is a matter of public record. The 11-month trial, the Harvel accounts, the pens on the moon opened in the 2nd month by a court order rather than a fleet, the Sept father in a dock with a lawyer instead of a rope. Ysenne Ithri-Vaal testified for 31 consecutive days and never once consulted a note, and when it was over the Reach corridor was quiet, and there was no war of cousins, and no one wrote a song about it, because nobody has ever written a song about drainage. The court demanded its witness. It got him. One afternoon, one deposition, a young human in a clean shirt answering questions in a flat voice for 6 hours. The feeds carried his face across 100 worlds for exactly 1 news cycle, and then they moved on because he was not interesting to look at, and he gave them nothing, and there were better stories. He went back to Marrow. Ysenne came to see him one last time before the yacht burned for home. He was in the kitchen. There were peppers drying from the cable run, and the racks were green, and the fish smelled of citrus. And old Das was at the counter with his bowl, and a small girl with a scar on her lip was sitting on the crate by the door, stealing beans. "They want to put your name on the stone," Ysenne said, "on Ilvet." The assembly voted. Adan Reyes stopped wiping the counter. "Tell them not to," he said. "I told them you would say that." "Tell them," he looked for the words and did not find good ones and used the ones he had. "Tell them a name on that stone makes it a monument. Leave it blank and it stays a asterisk place to put your hand." He folded the cloth and hung it on its hook. "There are 10,000 names in that field who never got to choose what they were. I got to choose. That's the whole difference. That's the only thing I've ever actually been given." She stood in the hatchway of a small green kitchen on a welded rock above a storm, and she looked at him, 27 years old, ordinary as bread, with flour on his sleeve and 3 fallen empires behind his eyes and 116 people on this station who would have died before they raised an arm to point at him. She had thought him nobody. She had been an Ithri, a daughter of the caste that existed to see, and she had looked at the largest thing in the room and catalogued a cook. But the deeper error, the one she would spend the rest of her long life turning over, was not that she had called him ordinary. It was that she had thought ordinary was what he had failed to escape. "Sit down, your clarity," said Adan Reyes. "It'll be 10 minutes." And she sat down and ate, and understood at last that the man who had erased 3 mighty kingdoms had spent every day since building the only thing that could not be taken apart, an ordinary life, on purpose, with his own hands, and no one's name on it at all.